The crowd erupted into applause as Liam Carter executed a flawless pirouette, his movements fluid and graceful, as if gravity itself bowed to his will. His heart raced with the exhilaration that came from performing under the bright stage lights, the eyes of hundreds fixed on him, transfixed by his talent. Dance was his life, his love, and he had given it everything. For Liam, the world disappeared when the music played. There was only the rhythm, his body, and the art he created with every step. But lately, something had begun to gnaw at the edges of his mind, a creeping unease that surfaced only in moments of quiet. It began a few months ago. Fleeting glimpses, strange dreams where he saw himself falling, crashing to the ground, his ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. At first, he dismissed them as the product of overexertion and stress. After all, he was preparing for the most important performance of his career, the lead role in La Danse de l'Âme, a contemporary ballet that would be his breakthrough into the international spotlight. Then the visions started happening while he was awake. It was subtle at first, just a flash, his foot slipping during rehearsal, a quick loss of balance that never happened in reality. But with each passing day, the visions became more vivid, more detailed. In the middle of practice, his mind would be thrust into a terrifying future, where he would see himself lying on the floor, writhing in agony, the music still playing as the audience gasped in horror. He hadn't told anyone, not his choreographer, not his dance partner Emily, not even his closest friend, Nick, who had always been by his side since their first days in the academy. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand? And yet, the urgency of these visions grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were not just random fears manifesting, but warnings, messages from the future, urging him to pay attention before it was too late. As Liam walked home from the theater that evening, the streets illuminated by the soft glow of street lamps, he couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. The visions had been worse today. 3 times during rehearsal, he'd seen flashes of the same moment. The instant his foot would slip, the sickening crack of bone, the searing pain, his breath quickened as he reached his apartment door. Was it all in his head? Or was something, or someone, trying to show him a future he could avoid? If these visions were real, how was he supposed to stop what was coming? The final performance was only days away, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the accident looming closer, as if time itself was pushing him toward that tragic fall. But one thing was certain, he had to find a way to change his fate. The morning light streamed through the windows of the rehearsal studio, casting long shadows on the polished wooden floor. Liam stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. His face looked paler than usual, his eyes haunted by sleepless nights and the weight of his growing fear. He stretched, trying to shake off the tightness in his muscles, but the unease lingered. Emily entered the studio with a warm smile, her energy vibrant as always. "Ready for another day of perfection?" she teased, setting her bag down and pulling her hair into a tight bun. Liam forced a smile, though his heart wasn't in it. Always. They began rehearsing the pas de deux, their movements in perfect harmony, bodies flowing in unison as they danced across the studio floor. Emily was light as a feather in his arms, her trust in him complete as he lifted her into the air and spun her gracefully. But even as his body moved automatically through the familiar choreography, his mind was elsewhere, waiting for the next vision, the next flash of disaster. And then it happened. Just as he lifted Emily into a grand jeté, the studio disappeared. In its place, he saw the stage, the audience, the blinding lights. He saw himself miss the landing, his foot hitting the wrong angle, his ankle buckling under his weight. Pain exploded through his leg, and he could hear Emily's scream, the music stopping abruptly as the crowd gasped. Liam snapped back to reality, his hands trembling as he gently set Emily down. She noticed the hesitation, the falter in his usually flawless execution. "Liam?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "What's wrong?" He shook his head, wiping the sweat from his brow. I just need a moment." Emily frowned but didn't push further. She knew how demanding the upcoming performance was on all of them, and she assumed it was just the pressure getting to him. But Liam knew it was more than that. The visions were getting stronger, more frequent. He could feel the tension building inside him, a ticking clock counting down to the moment everything would fall apart. After rehearsal, Liam found himself wandering the city streets, his thoughts consumed by what he'd seen. He couldn't go on like this. If he didn't find a way to stop the accident, it would ruin him. But how could he prevent something that hadn't happened yet? And what if the visions weren't meant to be changed at all? In the midst of his spiraling thoughts, his phone buzzed. It was Nick. "Hey man," Nick's voice came through the line. "You all right? You've been kind of off lately." Liam hesitated, unsure of how to explain. I don't know, Nick. Something's wrong. I keep seeing things like visions of an accident. My accident. I don't know what to do." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment Liam regretted saying anything. Then Nick spoke, his tone serious. "You think these visions are real? Like some kind of premonition?" Liam sighed. "I don't know, but it feels real, Nick. Too real to ignore." Nick was quiet for a moment before he finally said, "Maybe you should talk to someone. A doctor, a therapist, hell, even a psychic, if you think it's something supernatural. But you can't just let this eat you alive." Liam nodded, even though Nick couldn't see him. "Yeah, maybe you're right." As he hung up the phone, Liam knew one thing for sure. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. If the future was trying to warn him, he had to listen. The time was running out. The air in the studio was thick with tension as the days to the performance dwindled. Every movement Liam made felt like a step closer to catastrophe. His nerves frayed with each rehearsal, every pirouette feeling heavier, as if the inevitable was pulling him down. He hadn't told Emily or the choreographer about the visions, though he had considered it. What could he say that wouldn't make him sound crazy? That morning, as he walked into the studio, he noticed the strained glances from his fellow dancers. The whispers were growing louder. People were starting to notice. It wasn't just Emily who had sensed his hesitation. The others, especially the director, had seen it too. There were murmurs about whether he was losing his edge, whether the pressure was too much. But it wasn't the pressure. It was the visions. As he stretched in the corner of the studio, Liam's phone buzzed in his bag. It was a text from Nick. "Did you think about what I said?" Liam stared at the message, his fingers hovering over the screen. He had thought about it, but talking to a doctor wouldn't change the fact that these visions felt like more than just stress-induced hallucinations. They were vivid, precise, too real to ignore. With a sigh, he shoved the phone back into his bag. No time to deal with that now. Today's rehearsal was critical. They were running the entire performance from start to finish. No more room for mistakes. As he pulled on his ballet shoes, he caught Emily's eye across the room. She smiled, though there was concern in her eyes. She had always been able to read him, even when he tried to hide it. The music began, filling the studio with the hauntingly beautiful melody of La Danse de l'Âme. Liam's body moved automatically, each step ingrained in his muscles after months of grueling practice. But as they neared the pivotal lift, where his visions always struck, his heart began to race. Sweat beaded on his forehead and his breath quickened. And then it happened again. In an instant, the studio disappeared, replaced by the bright lights of the theater. He could feel the heat of the stage lamps, hear the rustle of the audience. He saw Emily in his arms, her face full of trust, her body suspended in the air as he lifted her. But just as before, his foot slipped. His ankle twisted, the sickening crack echoed in his ears, and he saw himself crashing to the ground, Emily tumbling down with him. The music stopped, the audience gasped, and the world went black. Liam jolted back to reality, his hands trembling as he stood frozen in the middle of the studio. He had stopped mid-lift, his arms halfway raised, leaving Emily suspended awkwardly. The music continued, but the room had gone silent with confusion. "Liam?" Emily's voice was soft, but the worry in her eyes was clear. "Are you okay?" He stepped back, shaking his head. I'm sorry, I can't." The choreographer, a stern-faced man with little patience for weakness, clapped his hands sharply. "Carter, what is going on? This is the second time this week you've faltered. If you're not up to this, I can replace you." Liam's heart sank. He had worked too hard to let it slip away now. But the visions, they were coming too often. He couldn't dance through them anymore. Not without risking everything. "I'm fine," he said quickly, though the tremble in his voice betrayed him. "I'll do better, I promise." The choreographer narrowed his eyes. "See that you do. This is your last chance." Liam nodded, but inside he knew he couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change, or the visions would consume him completely. Liam spent that night staring at the ceiling. The visions were playing in his mind on an endless loop. No matter how hard he tried to push them away, they kept creeping back in, more vivid than ever. The fall, the pain, the destruction of everything he had worked for. He couldn't let it happen. Nick's words echoed in his mind. Maybe you should talk to someone, even a psychic. It seemed ridiculous, and yet there was a part of Liam that couldn't shake the feeling that these visions weren't just his mind playing tricks on him. What if they were real? What if someone or something was trying to warn him? With a sense of desperation, he grabbed his phone and searched for answers. After a few minutes of scrolling through generic articles about stress and hallucinations, he came across something different. A small, obscure website dedicated to premonitions and psychic phenomena. At first, Liam was skeptical, but the more he read, the more he saw his own experience reflected in the stories of others. People who claimed to have seen flashes of the future, warnings of disasters that could be avoided. He found an address for a psychic in the city, someone who specialized in visions of the future. It felt like a long shot, but what else could he do? If there was even the slightest chance this person could help him make sense of the visions, it was worth a try. The next morning, Liam made his way to a small, dimly lit shop tucked away in a quiet alley. The sign above the door read, Madame Celeste, Seer of the Future. He hesitated at the entrance, feeling a mix of embarrassment and hope. This wasn't exactly something he had ever imagined himself doing. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of incense, and the walls were lined with strange artifacts, crystals, tarot cards, and ancient-looking scrolls. Behind a small table sat a woman in her late 50s, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders. Her piercing eyes seemed to look straight through him as he approached. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she said before he could even introduce himself. Liam blinked in surprise. Seen what? The fall, the injury, the moment that could destroy everything. Her voice was soft, but there was a weight to her words, as if she already knew everything he had been experiencing. Liam sat down across from her, his heart pounding. "How do you know?" She smiled faintly, shuffling a deck of tarot cards. "The future is not set in stone. What you are seeing are possibilities, branches of fate that have yet to be determined. The question is, which path will you choose?" Liam swallowed hard. "I don't want that future. I can't let it happen." Madame Celeste nodded, her eyes narrowing in focus. "Then you must find the source of the disturbance. Something in your life is out of balance, and it is leading you toward this catastrophe. Until you address that, the visions will continue, and the future you fear may come to pass." Liam left Madame Celeste's shop with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. He needed to find the source of the imbalance. The problem was, he didn't know where to start. His life had been consumed by dance, every waking hour spent perfecting his craft. Could it be the stress of the upcoming performance? Or was it something deeper, something he had been ignoring? He replayed her words in his mind as he returned to the studio the next day. The energy in the room felt different. There was an air of finality, a sense that everything was coming to a head. The performance was just 2 days away, and this was their last full rehearsal before the big night. The pressure was unbearable. Emily was already warming up when Liam arrived. She looked at him with a mixture of concern and determination. "Today's the day we nail this, right?" she said, trying to lift his spirits. Liam forced a smile. "Yeah, today's the day." As the rehearsal began, Liam tried to push everything else out of his mind. He focused on the music, the rhythm, the feel of the floor beneath his feet. But as they reached the climactic lift, the moment he feared most, the vision returned. This time, it was stronger, more intense. He could feel the pain radiating through his body, the sound of the bones snapping louder than ever before. But something was different. Instead of just seeing himself fall, he saw more. He saw the cause. His foot wasn't slipping by accident. There was something on the stage, a small object, barely visible, lying just where his foot would land. It was a small piece of set decoration that had been knocked loose, something no one would notice unless they were looking for it. The vision ended, and Liam gasped for breath, his heart racing. He stumbled back, his chest tight with panic. Emily rushed over, grabbing his arm. "Liam, what's wrong? You're scaring me." "I saw it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I know what's going to happen." Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "There's something on the stage. It's small, but it's enough to trip me during the lift. That's what causes the fall." He was speaking quickly, his words coming out in a rush as the realization dawned on him. It's not just bad luck, it's something that can be fixed. Emily stared at him, clearly trying to process what he was saying. "Liam? Are you sure? How do you know this?" "I've been having visions," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I've been seeing the future, seeing myself get hurt, but now I know why, and I can stop it." Emily looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the doubt in her eyes. But then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay, we'll check the stage before the performance. We'll make sure nothing's out of place. If you think this will prevent the accident, we'll do whatever it takes." Liam exhaled, relief flooding through him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Madame Celeste had been right. The future wasn't set in stone. He could change it. The night of the performance arrived, and the energy backstage was electric. Dancers rushed to and fro, adjusting costumes and makeup, nerves on edge as they prepared to step into the spotlight. Liam stood off to the side, stretching his muscles and trying to calm his racing heart. Emily approached him, her costume shimmering under the dim backstage lights. "I checked the stage," she said softly. "There's nothing there. Everything's clear." Liam nodded, feeling the tension in his chest loosen slightly. "Thank you." The stage manager called for places, and the cast began to gather. As the overture started, Liam closed his eyes and took a deep breath, centering himself. He couldn't let the visions distract him tonight. He had done everything he could to prevent the accident. Now it was time to perform. As he stepped onto the stage, the lights brightened and the audience fell silent. The music swelled, and Liam's body moved in perfect harmony with the rhythm. Every step, every turn felt precise, deliberate. He was in control. The visions were no longer haunting him. When the moment of the lift arrived, Liam's heart raced, but he focused. He lifted Emily into the air, and time seemed to slow. His foot landed exactly where it should, steady and sure. No slip, no fall. The relief that washed over him was overwhelming, but he couldn't lose focus. The performance wasn't over yet. As the final notes of the ballet played, Liam executed his last movement, an elegant turn that ended in a perfect arabesque. The audience erupted into applause, the sound of their cheers filling the theater. Liam stood there, breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He had done it. As he and Emily took their bows, Liam felt a sense of peace settle over him. The visions were gone. The future he had feared had been avoided. He had taken control of his destiny. Backstage, the other dancers crowded around him, congratulating him on a flawless performance. Even the choreographer, normally so stoic, gave him a nod of approval. But it was Nick, standing at the edge of the group, who caught Liam's attention. He walked over, a knowing smile on his face. "So, did you change the future?" Liam smiled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "Yeah, I did," Nick chuckled. "Guess those visions weren't just in your head after all." "No," Liam said softly, "they were real. But they don't control me anymore." As he left the theater that night, the cool night air filling his lungs, Liam felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The shadows of the future no longer loomed over him. He had taken the last step toward his destiny, and it was one he had chosen for himself.